Hello and welcome to the Reign of Blood podcast, brought to you by the Reign of Blood Festival team. So this is the podcast where you get a behind-the-scenes look at the con and the sharps and blood kinksters all over the world who will be celebrating with us. So this podcast is intended for mature audiences who have an interest in, well, blood and sharps-based kinks only. So if that's not you, then this podcast definitely is not for you. So these are real stories from real kinksters, and so they may contain discussions surrounding things like health, mental health, kink, blood, self-harm, traumatic experiences, and more. So if you're having a rough day or these topics could be distressing for you, then we would advise you to come back when you're more ready to enjoy the topic with us. I'm really excited to have the Carnie with me today. I am a huge fan of this person's work, and you likely are too. The Carnie is well known in the Sharps community and has graciously agreed to sit down and chat with me this evening, as well as to do a Q&A style class for us at Reign of Blood. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, I'm the Carnie. I go by he, him, it, based out of Chicago, Illinois. I've been working in a professional as a professional piercer for the last 15 plus years, and then there's a whole bunch of other years that aren't added onto that. Yeah, I pierce all day, every day for the last 15 years.
That's amazing. I absolutely love it. Love your work. Love the things that you do. Definitely have followed you for many years now. A lot of inspiration for many of the people on this podcast and listening, I'm sure.
That's what I try to do for everyone, is to put out some unique work so that they can get inspired and push the boundaries. Because I really feel that needle play has gotten a lot of bad rep because of just people being not fully risk aware and risk informed, especially the spaces in which to work in. However, it's also one of those things where I like to also push the boundaries, and within my classes and teaching style, I try to show people those scary places aren't that scary anymore, and coach them along with those different techniques to use to mitigate some of those risks involved.
That's amazing. And I've loved bits of educational materials that I've been able to read from you. What would you say your kind of style or approach to teaching sharps looks like?
Oh, I love it when the individuals that are attending my classes ask the questions, because usually the questions will lead me right through everything that I want to cover anyway. But I've always felt like, I've built up all these years of doing this and relearning and remastering and continuously learning. So I haven't been stagnant in terms of what I'm learning and the new things that are coming out. And so after taking all that time in acquiring this knowledge, I definitely want people who attend my classes or take my seminars or watch me work, pick up things that is relevant for them, that they can apply it into the scenes or the work that they're doing. And so my big push is always, let me teach and inform you for what you are looking for, so that you can take that resource home with you and apply it to your scene or your community, because that's more beneficial than me just going through an entire syllabus of materials I want to cover.
That's wonderful. So I'm picking out about 3 things from that. One, it sounds like you really enjoy more of an active style learner. And I'm also hearing you say that you really do more of a consulting and also collaborative style of education and growth to really support people into getting, you also have these high standards based on all of your research and education, but you're really willing to put in that effort to help people get there and reach the mark.
That is true, because like one of the things that I hear quite often is actually people referring to, well, I want you to be, risk rack. I apply rack, and risk aware, kink, and all that. And it's one of those things. Well, it's like, well, how can you say that in terms of in an educational point of view when you're not showing the highest level and caliber that is out there? And so by showing that the high caliber or teaching at that high level of professionalism, then you can apply rack appropriately, knowing what the highest level of reduction of cross contamination, consent being played, all of like proper setup and procedures. That it's like, well, now that you've seen it, you can't unsee that, and so it naturally, I feel, it helps the growth of this type of play within the community.
For sure. I tend to come from a bit of a public health based background. I'm actually, of course, a psychologist and neuroscientist, so I'm more science based, but I tend to think about things in the way of how it affects the community in general. And we always talk about kind of that gold standard, like here are the gold standards. And then if you at least know when you have that experience and support to get there, then any departures or alterations that you make from it is a deliberate choice and a conscious choice. And I think there's a lot of freedom to be found in that. To be able to know, to have the understanding of that why, and to really, one, keep communities and people safer, healthier, and playing longer, and also to improve the ethics of what we do with it too.
Yes, that's all I gotta say to that. Yes, I agree.
So, you were talking a little bit about some of the more growth in the field. What are some of the, I guess, newly rising techniques or tricks or tips that you've picked up recently or have been really pushing so far?
Oh my goodness. The thing that I push so hard on is stop recapping your needles. Keep a clean surface.
Oh, good Lord.
Once you're done using something, dispose of it. Um, having working as simple as working on a tray,
Mm-hmm.
because then your work field is also mobile,
Mm-hmm.
versus like throwing down a dental bib or a pee pad or a chuck and working, like having that laying on the like a massage table or whatnot. It's like by putting that tray underneath it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
those doomsday scenarios of like, oh man, I'm doing this awesome scene, and then the fire alarm goes off, and it's like, what? Quick, we got to evacuate, and I can take my tray with you, and we can clean this all up. So then when um, the fire department comes, and it's like, oh, nothing to see here.
I love it. It's a great way of reducing social risks, all of the above,
Yep.
and the risk of people stepping into your scene space if you're doing something more public. Love the idea.
I mean, the other thing too is like things can't roll off your tray now,
Mm-hmm.
and so that fear of I think I pulled out 24 needles, but I can only find 23, and I'm not sure what happened to that other one.
I absolutely love my trays. I have different trays for different things, but I'm also an organizational nerd, so totally with you on that one. It's like relaxing to the brain for me to be able to just lay everything out. I number my spaces with my setup, so I have like my various zones so that I don't cross contaminate into each zone, and then I work through based on the structure of the scene. I got that side of the tism. Um, but what does your setup typically look like other than having the trays, of course, and disinfection? What does that routine and setup look like for you?
Well, it depends on if I'm just doing, like if this is solely just needles, or is this a piercing thing, or am I doing my intricate line work with the lines? Like it all varies, but on the simple end of it, always having a surface cleaner, um, a skin cleaner, a surface to work on that is non-porous. Um, I build lots and lots of layers of to reduce cross-contamination. Um, I'm that person that shrink wraps everything um, in in the play spaces because you never know what was there before, or sometimes you
Mhm.
do know what was there before and would like to not remember what was there. Um, and so, besides wiping it down, I'm also saran wrapping it. Um, and then in terms of like my actual what's on my tray is really simple. It's just the gauze, needles, um, some surgical lube, um, uh, single use surgical marker,
Mhm.
and that's it.
A lot of room for creativity there.
Oh yeah. I mean the like I just try to keep it simple.
Hmm.
But then also like what is not on the tray but also in the space that I'm working at is like my sharps container. Is there a garbage can? My own fresh roll of paper towels,
Hmm.
even though that there may be some provided for by the space, but I always bring my own. Going back to the um I'm not sure who touched this last.
Yes. You sound like you sound like you've been reading my notes. Um, but it is those little things
Yep.
that we can often overlook, the small details that really help one, I think, show that support for the people that we're playing with or that we're piercing, or even ourselves, and also respect for the community and respect for the craft and the art form itself.
Because at the end of the day, like and even within that workspace, like I'm also working where I'm seated.
Mhm.
And so if the person I'm working on, they're laying down, um, and then I'm seated. So we're not going anywhere. The
Mhm.
other thing too is like by kind of parking yourself, it kind of also grounds you, but also having the partner laying down also helps reduce some of the risks for them. Uh,
Mhm.
but then in terms of for the greater community, it's like a nice visual of um, we're not going anywhere. We're gonna do this needle thing here. So if this is not something you're consenting to watch, um, you, like you can move elsewhere, knowing that we're staying put.
I like it. It communicates a lot there, and I hadn't quite considered that aspect to it.
Hmm.
Um, Usually, when I'm playing with sharps in a public space, I've had a couple unpleasant experiences with it. So I have like caution tape things and like mark out my whole space, put plastic down on the floor, all of the above to just say, stay away. But I think the way that you're talking about communicating that sharps are here and they do belong here and they're part of this space is something that I think that maybe I, as a sharps player, have not communicated that much. I don't think I'm that confident when it comes to playing with sharps in public. Almost, I tend to be perhaps more apologetic with it, I think. So that's something I'm going to work on. I love that. So, what's helped you, I
It
guess,
shouldn't
when you
be.
are playing in public with that?
Let me chime in on that. Yeah, it's one of those things like you shouldn't feel like you're intrusive. Like it is definitely one of those types of play where it's so intimate and so tiny of an environment that you can be working in that it can really shrink down like I guess the space in which you're playing and your focus and concentration is within like that little field of space versus like pulling out that flogger. where it's like I need 6 feet clearance on the back end of me, versus on the needles, it's like, yes, please respect my space and my partner space, but in terms of precision, like you don't need that much surface or like taking up so much space within um, the community in terms of the play space.
Absolutely, for sure. And I think a lot of it for me has come from a sense of wanting to be careful when it comes to other people, and having communities that don't necessarily understand sharps. But it sounds like you're also doing a lot to help non-sharps and blood players understand and feel more comfortable with sharps play. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you mind
It
speaking to
it's
that just a bit?
yeah, it's that kind of play where it's like it's found to be taboo within the taboo nature of kink, where um, there's fright or nervousness around the not knowing, um, or even the DMs or the space owners, or the dungeon masters aren't comfortable because they're not informed. Um, that putting that information out there and creating that space kind of will help the community kind of grow and get a better understanding, um, especially when your play space doesn't have a designated, this is the needle area or medical play area, how to create that feel, um, without killing the vibe of the whole play space. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, for
Yeah.
sure. What would your recommendations be for, say, someone running a venue or an event who is perhaps open to the idea of having blood and sharps play, but is maybe a little hesitant? What would you recommend for them?
Have lots of surface cleaner, have lots of paper towels, um, extra tarps, um, lots of sharps containers, lots of gloves, um, and light. Oh my goodness, all the other many spaces I've played in where like I mean I bring my own floor lamp, I bring a headlamp. I actually put two different types of headlamps on. Going back to your comment of like creating space,
Hmm.
um, where I keep my one headlamp down facing downward and on the front of my forehead, while the other one is a smaller headlamp, one that flashes um, red on the backside.
I
Um,
like.
where it's one of those things like I've got the nice white bright light in front of me to work, and then the little red flashing caution light behind my head.
I love that.
Yeah,
Absolutely the best.
and you'd be surprised with like the moment like you do something like that, and this venue sees more of that, you'd be surprised with how often people naturally just stay away.
Mm, for sure. And the flashing light. Uh,
Yeah,
I I I use headlamps and I also use my own floor lamps and things because Lord have mercy, I don't do most of the lighting in dungeon spaces super well. Uh, but I've never considered a flashing caution light. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
I know Miss Kitten introduced me to, I think, dream lamps or something like that, as a play space lighting for public play. So I'm gonna have to add that to my list of things to get now. Flashing caution light. Perfect.
Yeah,
So,
or having a really nice medical place space set up that is
yes.
vibrant beyond vibrant while the rest of the place is dark.
Yes, yes. And thankfully, my home play space has that capability. So, yes, there. But when I go elsewhere, unfortunately. So I was reading into your bio a little bit. I noticed that you'd mentioned that you had done piercings on basically every continent. Do you mind talking a little bit about that one?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, my last COVID kind of screwed up a lot of things for a lot of people. But in 2000, what was it, 2002? Um, I was able to check off my last continent, which was Australia. And I've been doing quite a bit of work in um, Australia recently. Um, yeah, that's been a blast to be able to just explore the world within the piercing tattoo body modification industry, being able to pierce on every continent except for Antarctica. Maybe one day those scientists will invite me down to do, I don't know, a scientific study on piercings in sub-zero weather.
Hey, it could happen. Oh, I love it. That's so cool. So let's see here. Do you mind telling me a little bit more about what got you into sharps kink in general? I'm a little intrigued as to your journey.
Well, I definitely feel I've been like I knew I was kinky at a very young age or thought differently regarding sexual play. I mean, as a teenager, uh, so hard to admit. Um,
I feel that it's
yeah,
okay. You're in good hands here.
oh
I
yeah,
feel that.
it's one of those things where I used to brand myself and then masturbate to it, which yeah, that's when I definitely knew like I definitely like things unusual or unique. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I, and the worst part is looking back, I'm like that was really stupid because I used like my dad's like soldering iron
Yep.
for melting lead for sealing pipes,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, just like I could have given myself uh, like lead poisoning, like it's just like also like how sterile and safe that was. It's
Right.
just one of those things like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but the thing is, to this day, I still have it. So I guess it stuck really well. Um, but in terms of like the like ramp up to everything, I used to run an entertainment company, uh, performing around the country, and working with other companies and nightclubs and traveling circus shows and venues, hence the Carnie. Um, that's where the name comes from. Um, but it was one of those things where I was creating a show and wanted to have hook suspension done, but not just have the person swing around. Like I wanted it to look like as the person was walking forward off the stage towards the audience, that they can continue to walk forward
Mm-hmm.
and walk right off the stage at the same level, and go over the crowd and then be able to swish and swing and do all this other stuff around. So I hired someone that was local, um, to facilitate that. However, when I explained the vision for the production, they're like, I have no idea how to do any of that. I just know how to do the suspension aspect of it all. And I told them, like, well, I have the certification in entertainment rigging, and I um, have the equipment to make this happen for the production. It's just I don't know how to do the whole piercing suspension, that whole aspect of it. And the person said, yeah, I'm totally down for it. Sounds like a crazy and cool idea. Definitely don't know how it's going to play out and work. Um, and like we did a practice run, and at that practice run, um, they were flabbergasted and was like, oh my God, this rigging is absolutely insane and so cool. I want to learn how to do this. And it was like, well, that's funny because I want to learn how to do what you're doing. And so it ended up being um, that whole thing of, well, you can't just learn how to throw hooks and suspend people. You've got to learn how to pierce first. And so I did my apprenticeship, um, in just normal body piercings, and then moved and advanced into hook suspension, and then into body modifications as well. Um, and it just kept going and growing, and we ended up touring with a whole bunch of um, national conventions and different entertainers, um, and would, you know, suspend a whole bunch of people for during the show. And
That's
that's
awesome.
kind of like where it just like exploded. But like the line work, um, for those that are more familiar with my needlework, that all came out of a close friend of mine um, being fearful about suspending. And so like um, I hooked him up to the suspension rig with the hooks in them, with the intention of not having them leave the ground, just to experience um, that tugging and pulling sensation. And because of they wanted to kind of just be in that presence in that moment of experiencing the tugging, um, and um, my brain wanted something more artistic out of it. I started um, braiding and interweaving my rigging line to make it more visually interesting for them to just kind of play. Um, and that was that like eureka moment of, oh my goodness, I can actually rig some complex patterns, um, and visually, um, it's quite interesting looking. And it doesn't. And then I was like, well, I don't need hooks. I can do needles. And then it went into, well, what kind? Well, I need some different line instead. And so I pretty much bought all the different line that was out there on the market at the time and tested its viability, its how it looked, also like what the material of it was, and just explored. And then it kind of just kept growing from there.
Wonderful. I love how much passion you have for it. And it's not easy to admit that, yeah, I started out here doing this stuff, because I have much the same feeling when I sit here and I think about cuts I used to do with just knives, or stabbing sewing needles through my fingers around the same times. I'm like, oh God, that's awful. I should
Mm-hmm.
never have been doing that. But I think it speaks to the need for accessible education, for folks to be able to have at least the knowledge to stay safe when they're doing these explorations. I think sometimes we often think that by withholding information, we're keeping people from doing things, when in reality, I don't think that's it at all.
What do you
So
mean?
I'm sorry.
What do you mean by that? Especially
So
like
then,
the withholding portion.
so I've heard a lot of folks who have made the statement that by withholding certain levels of education or information relating specifically to kink play, that it keeps people from doing things or exploring things that they should not be exploring without supervision, or et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that that has been my experience with it. From what I've seen, folks are going to try things, and having at least information, quality information out there and support, tends to make people safer. I mean, I really wish that when I had been getting into things, for instance, that I'd known that there were other options rather than sewing needles out there, before having to stumble onto it a lot later.
The interesting thing regarding all of that, um, or like the gatekeeping information, looking from, I guess, from the inside out, because again, this is what I do for a living. Um, that uh, if that level of risk is out there. Um, but if I was to hold back that information, and what I see it as, it's bringing more risk to not only the community, but also to my livelihood. Because if someone screws up in the kink world regarding this type of play or this type of activity, it's going to change the laws. And then those laws will start to change how I have to work under the professional level of piercing. And
For
it's like,
sure.
well, but if I educate those at that highest standard level, again, it goes back to, well, then, you're going to take away the information that's valuable to you, but also it's that whole thing if you can't unhear what was just communicated. And so, with the hopes that it's going to build the safety and build the community with better, safer practices so that it doesn't change, I guess, default or outside world, and yet improves what's going on within the kink world.
I love it. I love the both kind of individual micro perspective that you have along with the kind of more broader scope macro perspectives on it. Uh, because sharps and blood play is something that's so incredibly raw and intimate and personal. But I
And
think it really has the power to connect not just two or three or a group of individuals, but literally people all around the world who are doing these kinds of activities.
like, you won't see me post much or as often as I would like to, especially on social medias, just because of, like, I'm tired of getting like it removed, or the whatever the guideline, it's like not meeting the guidelines or standards, or it's just like there's so many barriers to putting it out there. And the more and more you keep doing it, more and more you try to, I guess, put more of that out there for people to grasp, the bigger picture of it, like the social medias decide, well, this isn't acceptable. But yet it's just making it go more underground and then increasing those levels of risk.
For sure. And I think since this is something that does tend to be the taboo among the taboo, even sometimes,
Oh yeah.
uh, like I, for one, I don't quite consider myself a sanguinarian, but I do consume blood on occasions. That's one of the classes I'm teaching for Reign of Blood is a little bit on the practice of consuming blood. Uh, and there tends to be a lot of shame surrounding that. I don't think we talk about the shame that we experience as blood and sharps players enough, or the fear of the shame or the fear of judgment. We all tend to be so concerned, I find. I don't know that I've ever met a experienced blood and sharps player that's not at least a little bit of a perfectionist to some degree. Um, I don't know if that's been your experience, or maybe I just find them because I'm a psychologist and that's what I do. But this tends to be something where I think it does drive it further underground when we don't speak it out loud. Shame does not survive being spoken out loud. Having that connection and unification is the opposite of that experience of shame. So I think what you're talking about is even more vital from both a personal, emotional, psychological health and a public health standpoint as well.
Oh, absolutely. Um, but there's that other piece too of like the inspiration as well, of how, I mean, as you started the conversation off today, the, you know, inspiration that I've created even for you about this type of play, or just by putting it out there, um, inspires others to explore this further. Or even the comments that I do receive is like, I'm not a needle person, or I'm not into this type of play, but this is visually appealing, aesthetically pleasing. This is like, it definitely put a new perspective on this type of play, where it's not just that superficial, needles is painful. It's, wow, this can be really beautiful.
I love it. So, do you mind telling us a little bit more about what you're going to be doing at Rain of Blood, what you're envisioning for your kind of Q&A session, maybe a little bit about why you chose to get involved?
Well, definitely want to do this Q&A more so because I really think that um, after a class ends, the mind starts racing, and it's like, oh, I should have asked that at that moment, when I was taking that class. Or especially with it being digital, you don't have that moment to pull an instructor off to the side and ask that question. um, or the other part too is, like, my email box gets bombarded, and it becomes overwhelming to respond to everything. And it's like, I feel like I can't just answer the question with the little yes or no and call it a day, where it's like, like going in depth with explaining everything. And so that's where kind of like, here's the chance to ask all of those pertinent questions that are so specific to the type of play that you're doing. To, again, goes back to, like, I want to teach you the things that are important for you specifically, so you can take that home and incorporate that with your needle bottom. um, but it's mainly that opportunity to just like, um, go ahead, pick my brain as well, also leaving it loose and open-ended. um, but I also am going to come and start my class off just in case, because the questions usually take a moment for them to roll in, to start off with the most common questions I get asked, to answer some of those things for people, um, as my, like, icebreaker.
I
uh,
love it.
and then why for the event is really simple. um, I've been an inspiration for a lot of people, um, and this is an opportunity for them to speak directly with me. um, and like, again, like, I've been doing this for I don't know, far too long. um, that gives opportunity for the fan club to, get that moment to ask all the questions.
Well, better believe that my little organization team is going to be front and center right there. Miss Kitten, Radically Dark, and I are all just sitting there going, oh my gosh, we are so excited for this class. So excited. But let's see. Oh, there was one other question that Miss Kitten wanted me to ask. She's been asking everybody, and I promised her before she went to bed that I would ask. So she's been asking everybody what kind of pajamas they prefer to sleep in. So I will go ahead and pass that question on to you. What kind of pajamas do you like?
And usually no shirt, um, and loose fitting pajama pants. um, I think the one I wear the most, it has a flower of life, like tribal pattern on one leg.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But I also like to turn the heat down, even being in Chicago during Chicago winters. Like, I'll turn the heat down at home, just a little bit, so then I can throw an extra blanket on, and just I don't know, completely submerge myself under the blankets.
Yes, I feel you there. My house, I like to keep it at about a good 67 degrees at night, but I also live with a literal human furnace for a partner,
Uh,
so I feel that very much. Well, is there anything else you want to tell listeners before we see you in April?
come check out my class. Come ready with questions. Pick my brain. Be happy to answer all of your sharp or breaking the skin kind of things. So if regarding hooks, needles, suspension, scarification, body modifications, all that kind of thing.
Awesome. And if folks wanted to get a hold of you to perhaps um, take advantage of your professional services. I know your inbox is incredibly full. Mine is insane, and I can't even imagine what yours looks like. But if they did want to get a hold of you to schedule something like that, how would they do so?
One of the easy way would be on the Instagram under Carnival of Curiosity, or on the FetLife under the underscore Carnie, Carnie.